And welcome, everybody. I'm Martin Raymond, the co-founder of the Future Laboratory. And today, of course, I'm joined by our strategic foresight editor, Adam Steele.
Hello.
Hello there from Adam. And like many of the team here at TFL, Adam edits, thinks, writes, and delivers, shall I say, foresight, which, like trends, are all about looking at the future on a daily basis.
And in true Future Laboratory style, we wanted to start today's session by looking at a quote that really encapsulates this strange moment we find ourselves in today. So this quote here is from John Elkington, who's a writer, a thought leader, an author, and he's also known as the godfather of sustainability, which is
I like that.
Quite a title. And he says that there is something peculiar about the world at this particular moment. It's agitated and excitable. We're ending a period of relative stability in terms of geopolitics as old superpower rivalries return, while the climate chaos is also looming. And I think when you add the kind of economic certainty that we're experiencing at the moment, the ongoing health crisis, the fallout from COVID-19 into the mix as well, it really becomes clear just how many once-in-a-generation challenges are kind of at play at the moment.
I mean, it is. If you think about how he is one of the many expert voices that we will speak to when you're looking at the area of foresight. So it's not just about, somebody being an academic, a leader. We also have this thing about, are they thought leaders? Are they thinking about tomorrow in a different, in a leading, in a questionable, in a challenging way? And if they are, then that's when we really begin to understand what it is when we talk about foresight. So consider it's the shaping of tomorrow. So what's the versions of that, that the rest of us can follow, for example, challenge. How do we co-create tomorrow? That's important when it comes to foresight. And also, how do we use it? And I think this is what a lot of kind of brands and businesses forget about. How do you use it to develop better strategies for uncertainty, which is really what we're trying to do. Is not just to predict tomorrow, which I think is what you would hope you're doing. It's mitigating risk and removing uncertainty in a way that allows you to, kind of develop a process or a framework for moving forward. So it's quite a lot of things to think about. But in essence, I guess, really foresight is about what the challenges are. But before that, you have a thing called the trend. So what I always think about is a foresight provides you with a framework, and the trend provides you with the driver of that framework. So I always think before I'm answering a question about, what does tomorrow look like? I say, what are the dominant forces or shifts or trends that are likely to shift that particular perspective? And one of the areas we looked at this year was what we called, the trend we called paralysis paradox. So it is about contradiction, it is about uncertainty. But I think, Adam, when you were writing it, you also noticed that it contained a lot of other, I suppose, insights that were giving us clues as to how tomorrow would begin to look. Resemble.
Exactly. So the paralysis paradox was this idea that there's now so much at stake. The threats that we face are now so existential, so frequent, so unceasing, that we're kind of paralyzed by this fear, by anxiety, by pessimism. And
that's me, very pessimistic about the future. Well, sort of.
And those feelings really cloud our ability to kind of locate the right path forward, despite us wanting to and knowing we have to. The paralysis paradox explored how, in response to that feeling, it's really time for businesses to kind of light up that path forward, draw on their expertise, their assets, and their reach to figure out the future really with citizens, and make a better future happen, injecting optimism, long-term thinking, and positivity back into that trajectory that we're all on. I think one really interesting thing is that all those tools we need to do that are already there, and it's just a case of locating them.
So also, I guess, how you're pulling them together. I have a question. And this is something that a lot of people were asking, both in terms of questions today, but generally, when I'm talking about foresight, people say, well, what is it? And I'm going to ask you three questions. I was thinking, I'm going to put them on the spot here. Is it the ability to see into the future? That's a simple, straightforward one. Is it the desire to contextualize and formulate the future? Okay, that's my number two. Number three, this probably, I'm probably going to oversell this. Like, is it a systematic use, participatory system, framework, future intelligence gathering mechanism that allows us to better understand the processes for building a tomorrow that involves everybody, but also helps people to establish leadership? So I've probably given you the answer there. Right. Okay. Well, what's your thinking of that? Because that's kind of actually me translating the questions that came through earlier.
I think it's got to be option C, right?
Okay. Why do you say that?
Well, that's exactly what our Foresight reports are designed to do, to deliver that kind of thought leadership.
Was I priming the question there? Was I kind of trying to give you some insight to my Foresight, maybe? Okay.
But in terms of how we get there, how we uncover that thought leadership and deliver it to our clients, this is a simplified kind of lowdown on our process, but it kind of serves to show the key steps that we take within each report we work on. So the first thing we do is kick off that project, immerse ourselves into the client, and conduct stakeholder interviews with people from across the business. And this really enables us to develop a deep understanding of the specific business challenge that are being faced at the moment, what success would look like, and understand how to make our reports as useful as possible and really identify those key issues that clients want to be talking about. We then filter that vision through LSN Global, our trends intelligence platform, and also the Foresight research system, which is our proprietary research tool, houses all of the research we've done over the past 20 years and is updated daily. From there, we kind of then utilize our expert network, which again has been built up over the last 20 years, and engage a number of experts relevant to the topic being explored, from industry leaders through to academics, scientists, thought leaders as well. We've interviewed choreographers before.
We have some brain scientists. I'm thinking engineers. I did one who was a forensic psychologist. I did somebody who looks at acoustical engineering in buildings, because you're looking at the notion of ugly building syndrome and how you change that in the future. So I always think that the experts usually at that point are relevant, not just to the topic of the review, but also providing us with sometimes tangential thinking that opens up the debate in a completely different and unexpected direction.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's people that are thinking differently.
I mean, it's interesting on your, I'm looking at, people are probably watching me looking up and down, because on your methodology, you have kind of key points. And myself and Adam always laugh at, because I am slightly more complex in my head. So my methodology, which is, I think Adam has just cleared up, has about 16 different touch points, from cultural navigators, expert interviews, secondary research, primary research, our Foresight research system, which is a bit like, if you imagine the tip of an iceberg, at the top of the tip of the iceberg is your outputs in the report, of the TFL business outputs. But beneath it, there's a lake of thinking, data scraping, expert analysis, research, which sits in this big chamber or this vessel, where you can then put your dashboard on top of it and query it and pull out answers that you need to fit into the report. So I always think that the sense of what people are seeing, and I think this is a great thing about most Foresight, is you're trying to distill quite carefully and strategically a lot of information and data and research and insights and experts into a slice of intelligence that's as simply written as you can make it, so that it's digestible. But I always think what's great is behind that single entity or that report or the presentation, there's a vast set of links that people can access and use as part of that strategy when they actually work on the report or use it in the business. So it's kind of, I just love the way you've done it properly, you've simplified, and I go, wow, that looks nothing like the thing that I have down here on my desk, but well done for clarifying and simplifying.
So yeah, as Martin said, once all that research is done, we have that big wealth of research and insights. We then develop the kind of hypotheses for the report. So the key consumer trends we want to talk about, the macro trends, the micro trends, and those headlines as well before we begin the writing.
I like the way you're really calm and clear. I can actually see it in your head, the way you're dropping each stage as you work through it.
Yeah, I think the reality is somewhere in the middle, probably, isn't it?
Okay.
Between the both of us. But yeah, the result of all of that research is our bespoke Foresight reports. And before we delve into what these look like, I just wanted to ask you a question, Martin.
I thought you might. I thought there might be another question.
So obviously, you've been thinking about the future for a long, long time. And I'm just wondering if, has there ever been a more important time to be talking about the future, a more exciting time?
Well, I think every time to talk about tomorrow is exciting because, everybody knows that tomorrow hasn't happened. And what you're trying to do with any kind of forecast or piece of foresight or any kind of scenario about tomorrow is to create optional and optimal views of what it could look like. And if you think about, what word has entered the dictionary this month over the year, permacrisis has now become a word that everybody is using. And I go, this is great both for forecasters and it's great also for businesses because permacrises require optimal, multiple solutions. So it's about looking at what's the crisis, what's the challenge, then how do I work my way to a better tomorrow as a consequence of that? How do I think about involving people? How do I think about embracing different points of view, different perspectives? And, there was a book, I think, it was Francis Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History. Boy, what a terrible title. Because as we knew at the time when he wrote it, it was the beginning of a new kind of history, a new kind of understanding about how the world would develop over the next 30 to 50 years. And I think the point I think it's exciting now is a lot of the changes that we've been seeing have accelerated forward. A lot of the new sciences that we've been watching are suddenly coming together. And a lot of the new shifts in politics, in sociology, in biology, in AI, in quantum are suddenly not just visible and available. They are now there for commercial testing. So I go, wow, if this is the case, we should now be really, as brands and businesses, working out what our position is in this shift. This is, I think, is it Marx Mills talks about the notion of the roaring 20s, where suddenly we are about to be hit by a tsunami of not just disruption, but of opportunity. So have you planned for that? Have you thought about it? Have you considered the options? And also, I remind people, you think about Borders, you think about IBM, you think about VHS and that. They had no rights to the future because they weren't understanding and anticipating how those changes work. So suddenly we are in a position to be participants, to be co-partners and co-creators. And my question is, when I meet businesses on a daily basis, I go, how much are you doing? They go, oh, hang on, we've not really thought about that. Our job is to think about tomorrow if we are to defend and make today more optional and optimistic. So kind of think about what we're trying to do with the future. And I think that's to your point about, the thinking should be done now, but it should provide us with answers today, as well as providing us with frameworks for tomorrow. I guess that would be my thinking on it.
Definitely. And I think there's so much of the future up for grabs at the moment. I think it's obviously extremely difficult to look past the permacrisis, right? But if we put that to one side for a moment and we see that actually there's so many other kind of transformational things that you kind of alluded to there, with the metaverse, for instance, promising to transform.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah, there you go. Promising to transform the very fabric of how we experience the world. You've got AI and machine learning impacting the future of work, the future of creativity, and the rise of Web3 and decentralization really kind of creating a new way of functioning in societies. There's so much to talk about.
Oh my God! If you think about just Web3 and how that has changed the way we talk about collectivism, collaboration, decentralization, better representation, a more equitable way of voting or establishing businesses. So suddenly, in terms of something that was a simple technological shift, and this is what I always think about foresight and forecasting. Some people just look at technology, and what I think forecasters need to do, what all of us here today need to think about, is how it affects the way we live. How we think as people and as citizens, because I think one of the things that came out of the paralysis paradox is that shift away from defining people as consumers to referring to them as citizens because of the shifting equity that brings, and how it plays into the fact that we need to be thinking not just more decentralized, but I guess more representational. And that just came out of a comment somebody made about Web3 technology, but how does it affect people, behaviors? And I think suddenly that's where the foresight takes off and the excitement begins. You can see I was shaking there when I was saying that. I was excited. I was.
So, that's obviously a quick lowdown on, all the kind of amazing things that are happening at the moment, and the fact that there is a lot of pessimism and a lot of negativity, but behind that there is also opportunity. There is, as like you referred to with Mark Mills there's this 20-year cycle of innovation that we're set to kind of embrace. And that's the kind of messaging that we really deliver with our foresight reports. And we just wanted to talk through the three kind of main products really that we work on when it comes to our bespoke foresight reports. And the first is foresight reports themselves. So these provide
fairly aptly named, I think.
Fairly aptly named, yeah. And they provide clients with a futures point of view on the impact of the evolving consumer landscape alongside trends on relevant industries, sectors and topics. We've covered everything from the future of supply chains to the future of cake. And used externally...
Cake. That's my future. Sorry.
Used externally, our foresight reports deliver that thought leadership and disruptive thinking that builds reputation and awareness in the media and enables brands to really position themselves uniquely against competition. But also, sometimes they're used internally by clients. So in doing so, they're kind of used as a springboard for innovation, demystifying the future, and analysing the impact on consumers, on brands and businesses, and really giving clients a foundation from which to align. We then have our content partnerships, which are kind of like foresight reports light in a way. So
is this more like kind of editorial content, website content? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they offer that kind of rich mix of insightful content. Things like thought leadership articles, trend listicles, future scenarios. You could even have a podcast with Martin Raymond here if you wanted.
Doing my best, trying not to mix my alliterations or confuse my consonants.
And these typically are used on brands or businesses' kind of blogs, their newsletters, microsites and things like that. They're often delivered weekly, monthly or quarterly, and enable clients to kind of continually explore the relevant consumer industry or cross-sector trends and future-facing topics.
So if you think about, a lot of that is, about the text, about the data, about what the kind of infographics. And I was thinking, well, what does it look like? If we're talking about the future of retail, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it even smell like? If I'm thinking about the future of quantum or AI creativity, or the future of CBDs, sometimes what we need to do is to show people, because it could be about capturing a nuance, capturing a sense of texture, a sense of moment, a sense of, sensuality, if we're looking at particular kinds of trends. And all of these things require a different kind of output. Hence, the area that a lot of the teams will work on is, how do you visualize these worlds? How do you visualize, if you think about the workplace of the future, there's a lot of talk about the psychology of the workplace and the many states which are actually working on a report about it, but also what should workspaces look like? Do they have to look like failed WeWorks or really trumped up Soho houses? Or is there something else? And if there is, what does that look like? And that's really, I guess, the essence of how these visual reports are pulled together.
And yeah, as well as having kind of three main products, we've distilled kind of the question why foresight reports into three main answers as well. I mean, there's many reasons to kind of harness and explore a foresight report, but these kind of three things here we think are really key. And the first one is elevating your brand through thought leadership. So, our reports are regularly featured in titles such as the Financial Times, the BBC, Harper's Bazaar, the New York Times, and they really act as a tool to kind of spearhead PR campaigns and generate media attention. Yeah.
Recently on Radio Essex.
Oh, really?
Which that was my favorite one, actually. It was probably one of the best interviews, sharp, funny, and I just thought the presenter actually got the point of the report, which was how you could change, kind of issues about the beauty sector. So I was going, wow, okay. Never ignore how and where a useful piece of publicity can come up.
Yeah, very true.
So that's my hint, is go for Radio Essex.
And then, the second kind of key thing we think our Foresight reports do is inspiring radically different thinking. So these are typically when reports are used internally. They kind of provoke and inspire a different way of thinking within your business. Really obviously relevant for part of the 2023 planning cycle, whether it's aligning internal teams around a vision of the future or kind of unlocking consumer and category insights that teams can harness going forward.
And one of the areas I think to think about is how, for example, innovation. So a lot of the time we're asking about what's the future of, and I go, the future of this. So how do you then use that insight to innovate, either a category or a sector, or for example, to give yourself a competitive edge? And that's also one of the other reasons, I guess on the ends of the reports that I'll be working on, a lot of the time it's about using this kind of intel and this kind of foretelling of tomorrow to help you develop either a new system, a new strategy, a new piece of product. In kind of some of the beauty categories, we've worked where it's just being the product we're focusing on, but all of that research sits behind it so that you can take it to all aspects of your kind of logistics, your marketing, your distribution, your PR teams, and go, okay, this is what we're going for. So I do think that sometimes these things seem simple, so we're looking at the future, the foresight, but it's really what is the context of looking, what is the angle for looking, what sort of solutions do you want? Because you can specify, and I always think this is the best way to think about the future. It hasn't been written, so we can choose the ending of the story, or at least propose an ending that better suits our needs and requirements if that works with the customer. So it's not just an open-ended conversation. It is one with a closed loop, and hopefully, and I think potentially, with a positive and I guess one that's productive and profitable. Because that's really the other issue you're looking for, is to make sure that when you get these things, that you're, well, okay, how do I essentially improve something, extract value, maybe instill values, and also draw profit, because you still got to get some sense of outcome at the end of it.
And now I guess we're going to kind of explore some examples, I suppose, of those outcomes, right?
I think that was one of the Radio Essex one, the beauty pie.
I'm
sure. Sorry, that was my tip on that one.
So the first report we wanted to talk about was written with Beauty Pie. So they commissioned us to explore how the kind of next generation of hyper knowledgeable, hyper savvy consumers are demanding more honesty, integrity, and inclusivity from beauty brands. And they're kind of questioning everything from the ingredients they use to the prices they're charged. And the result was the Beauty Futures 2025, Beauty, Utility, and the Rise of the Question Everything Economy report.
A big title.
Big old title. And it's a big report, and it questions essentially why beauty is still an industry that does things the traditional way, in ways that kind of perpetuates the myth that people want to buy into the mystique of beauty, when in fact we should be focusing on the innovation behind ingredients, behind technology, and behind the artistry within the industry.
It's almost reversing the entire existence for the industry, because this is back to the science and the tech and the knowledge, the expertise, where previously it was about, to your phrase, smoke and mirrors and magic, and perhaps, as somebody said, the adjective of the moment. And the problem with those kind of adjectives in this kind of day and age, we're so bored with fake news or worried about it that we really want really legitimate and well-balanced facts and evidence. And I think weirdly, that's what the brand was doing. And I guess what the report was helping them to kind of prove and underwrite.
Yeah, completely. And it's a completely disruptive business model, really, within the industry. And to bring it to life, we created a set of trends, which were evidenced by expert interviews with people like Millie Kendall, who's the founder and CEO of the British Beauty Council. And those trends included things like the rise of beautility, which is the idea that...
Like that phrase?
You like that one?
Yeah. Was that your idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the idea that, beauty for beauty's sake is no longer enough, and that customers now expect value to be delivered within each interaction, whether it's a product that's got a functional element to it, a service that's been personalized to them, or a kind of comms and marketing engagement that provides them with some kind of utility. We also looked at the rise of radical fairness and transparency within the industry in order to kind of deliver solutions to some of those big issues that we've been talking about in the paralysis paradox. The culmination of the report was an in-conversation between Marcia Kilgore, the Beauty Pie founder, and our own co-founder, Chris Sanderson, with the report featured in the Telegraph, among other publications as well.
And I think, do you remember we created the term bleisure, which really captured that shift between business and leisure. This is in 2007, I think. You check it on Wikipedia. It's now gone in as one of those kind of TfL created words. Utility is one of those words that each year, it's like, perma crisis. I always look at within Foresight reports, it's always great to find words that the press will pick up on or that industry start using as a standard, like digital nomad. If you think about that word now, first time you hear it, you scoff at it. Second time you hear it, you put it in inverted commas. Third time you hear it, you're just using it as a standard measure. So again, these reports should be creating a language that becomes you and allows you to start having a conversation with journalists that is being tagged as your conversation as opposed to another business's. So that was why I was kind of particularly interested in the word utility.
Yeah, I think the Promatic Traveller was another great example of that.
That was yours as well.
That's
you're almost a kind of hat trick there. Promatic, which was it? What was the phrase? How to describe it?
Progressive
nomadic. So, and we have quite a lot, if you go onto our website and blog, that covers that, because weirdly, post-COVID, this tribe, which again seemed to be marginal beforehand, has suddenly exploded. And every travel agent, every hospitality person, every person looking at a new type of category traveler has honed in on this particular word. So well done. Yeah, let's see if you got in the next one. If you got another word that we could use, let's see.
No words here, but there are other ways, I guess, to get those headlines. And stats and data is one way of doing so. So this report here was a report we worked on with analytics company called Click, and they wanted us to explore the future of data literacy and why data literacy and data skills will be so integral throughout the next decade. And to do this, we spoke to a number of influential industry experts, and we also commissioned a survey of over 1,200 kind of C-suite executives and 6,000 employees. And we really, that kind of research really revealed that there's a massive, massive gap when it comes to data literacy. We unveiled the fact that over half of company leaders see their workforce as confident in data literacy skills. But the reality is starkly different, and only 11% of employees feel fully confident
11%.
in this area.
Wow, and probably at that rate, people are unwilling to maybe ask further questions because they feel they should know.
Yeah, because it's assumed they do know. The report really was a kind of a call to arms, essentially, to kind of bridge that data literacy gap and really help businesses understand the kind of upskilling requirements needed to take full advantage of data, both now and through to 2030.
I mean, one of the things, because I was thinking, and I guess that was one of the reports that was targeting journalists and getting PR. What are some of the headline stats? Because I get when we create words like utility or pleasure or promatic, but when you're thinking about things, for example, like a report where you really want to drive home the stats, were there some really good things in this? And if so, what were the ones you pulled out?
Yeah, so we pulled out one here, which was that 88% of C-suite executives believe their companies will hire for the position of head of betterment by 2030, wow. which is pretty.
I've already seen two applications where people are looking for heads of wellness, which is probably not dissimilar. I know it's different, but again, I think it's that drift where you would never have had a creative. Chief Creative Officer. Yeah. And now any company worth its salt in the kind of those industries will have Chief Creative. Yeah. So the same with health and well-being. So again, it's already given me a good story as to how I could spin that out in a feature, or actually take it into my HR team and start using it within the business to drive value.
And yeah, I think we also surveyed people about a chief metaverse officer, chief trust officer as well, so lots of different job titles. And then there were some great foundational stats too, such as the fact that 85% of executives believe data literacy will become as vital in the future as the ability to use a computer is today.
Interesting, because if you say it was 11% of people who believe, that's a lot of people who are struggling. It's a bit like, if I think about my dad, actually couldn't write. So he grew up where he started working in the factory at 14, and it was interesting. At 53, which is, he's going, this would never happen. He was asked to start filling in dockets.
Oh, really?
And you realize if you can't write, what the fuck do you do? Suddenly your entire world shuts down. And I keep reminding people that it is so similar to how it was if you couldn't write. To say that you don't code or that you have, poor computer literacy skills seems like that's a so what. Actually, in the workplace of the future, people will be like my dad, where he's going, how can I work in this company anymore? Because I can't write. It's kind of as shocking as that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time you see these facts, and the job, I think, of a good Foresight report is to use those comparisons to jolt people back into understanding that this is not a trivial statistic. If you were talking about literacy, which is really what we're talking about here, how shocking that would be. So we really need to then apply that forward and go, wow, people will be equally shocked if they think that kind of shrug about being illiterate when it comes to data is acceptable in the workplace. I mean, my father did, luckily, because I worked with him to teach him to read, which was a great privilege to do. But the fact that he managed to get so far without even telling it to his family was interesting. And I think that's the same with data. We can let these things slip through without feeling it's going to affect your career down the line.
Yeah. Well, and I think this final stat here probably kind of encapsulates just how transformational data skills will be. This idea that apparently, according to our survey, US workers who can demonstrate their data literacy skills can expect a 20% salary increase.
Wow. So that's, And my dad, what he was worried about was a loss of salary.
Yeah, exactly.
For the same reason. It's quite shocking if I tell the story to people, they just think it's mad. But if I put it into the context of what we've just been looking at, we go, wow, I hope a lot of you are now panicking to think that that's what we could become unless we take a decision now about shifting the style. That was a bit profound.
That was a bit profound.
Yeah, I bet you weren't expecting that.
And one more case study, we wanted to talk about is Vodafone, the Connected Consumer 2030 report. So Vodafone Smart Tech, which is an arm of Vodafone, they sought an industry-spanning report that brought to life 2030 living for its audiences and really kind of explored how connectivity is going to be integral to the human experience in the future. So to do this, we really cast our net wide and we explored the role of connectivity in future cities, in healthcare, and in building a more sustainable world as well. Interviewing 5 experts across different industries and 3 Vodafone stakeholders to do so. We explored how the connected consumer will manifest differently in 5 different European markets. The result was a report which really underlined just how integral and transformational the connectivity that Vodafone provides will be to 2030 life. All of those things like smart cities can't happen without them, essentially.
So kind of, if you think about that sort of report, how are you activating that? Because we've seen how we're giving, putting those words in. We're looking at how the stats can be deployed in, I think, a more challenging way than just what appears in the report. Were there ways that you deliver this that would be kind of more useful for journalists or people consuming the report?
Yeah, so this was activated in quite an interesting way. We had a dedicated microsite for the report, which kind of pulled out some key stats and infographics and was quite nice to look at.
We like that, or visual interpretation, yeah.
And then alongside that as well, we put together a panel event, which was chaired by our co-founder, Chris, which featured experts from the report alongside Vodafone stakeholders with some select press invited. And it really helped to generate some really strong media coverage in places like the Times.
I like that select press. There's actually Pamela Brown, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Vodafone Smart. She was saying that the launch of the Connected Consumer 2030 report has created thought-provoking content that has really ignited international conversation. I think it was one of the things they were kind of really keen on, both internally within the business. So I think a good report looks at that, but also externally through media and crucially with the consumer. So you really have to track that whole process and decide, is it a consumer-based report? Yes, it is. That's one tone of voice. If it's an internal-facing report, that's a different tone of voice. So that's great to know that there are differences. And then if it's kind of one that's covering everything, that requires a third type and tone of voice. And I think all of these things, which seem slightly trivial when you set out, become hugely important in terms of how you want the report to land and where you want it to land and within which context that report is seen. So it's kind of all these things that sit behind it that I always guess when you do these stakeholder interviews, to your point about that slide, when you have those done, that gives you a sense of exactly where this report needs to go.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
And now I believe it's time for some questions.
We have. There's a lot of questions. Did you want to ask or shall I ask?
I can ask, yeah.
You go with the first question.
We've got a little bit of time left. So the first question is from Matthew Bamford-Bowes from the Elephant Room. And he asks, if we live in an era of uncertainty, when will the next era be upon us? And can you predict that it will be better? With a smiley face.
Yeah, I think the era of uncertainty is forever. The notion that we have lived in certain times is almost inconceivable. If you think about any period in our history, it was always uncertain. If you think about the Dark Ages, you think about the Renaissance, you think about the Enlightenment, you think about the Roaring Twenties, the previous Roaring Twenties, you think about the never had it better 50s, 60s. There's always a time when we think that things are certain and that suddenly it is next going to be uncertain. I'm going to reverse that and say it has always been uncertain. That's the point about progress. And that's the point about how tomorrow is always better. I know sometimes people find it extraordinarily hard to believe. Tomorrow was always better than today or yesterday. If you look at historically, survival rates, rates of uplifting people from poverty, rates of energy, rates of speed, rates of change, rates of education, it has always got better. So what we also need to look at is, knowing that is the pattern, how do we then make tomorrow, well, not certain, because I think we need to have risk to kind of fuel our sense of progress and our desire to progress. But what we also need is the pathway, the framework, the bridge. And I always think this is what great forecasting, good governance, a good politician, rare as they are, great scientists and academics and ethicists, they're asking those questions about how we mitigate this movement into tomorrow, because the uncertainty isn't tomorrow. Remember, we plan these things, so we should know what we're planning. That's the point about forecasting and about foresight. However, when we start fearing tomorrow, which is what's happening now, when we start blaming tomorrow for today's ills, and when we start looking to the past and saying, wasn't it better there? We are reneging on our responsibility as humans, and we are reneging on the opportunity to improve it for our children, to improve it for ourselves. So uncertainty is forever. There has never been an age of certainty. There has always been an age of, you looked at nostalgia. And my point about nostalgia is it's a false hope that a lot of people spend their time looking back to. If we looked forward with the same degree of energy and effort and longing, long for the future, the way that we keep longing for the past, that in itself would change the game hugely. So to go back to the point of the question is, we need to look at certainty. That's what the future is about. The past, it's gone. The now is uncertain. Why? Because we're not making an effort to plan tomorrow. We're still hoping it'll either get back to where it was, the old new normal, or that somehow somebody else would make it better for us. That's not the way to look at it. We need to make it better collectively. It's the only way to do it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure, I think, was it Matthew who asked that question? I think, Matthew, you'd asked that a similar question previously. And I was thinking, wow, really interesting. And so I'm glad that you asked again in the context of foresight. There is a question here from somebody who sounds like me. It's not me. It's Miriam Raymond, who is a kind of global cultural strategy at was Weber Shandwick, Miriam, I think. But also I know that we have worked together. In fact, you used to work at the Future Laboratory. And she said it's hard to talk about sustainability or anything aspirational when there are such pressing concerns. This is a relation to the cost of living crisis, people's mortgages and hyperinflation. So how to keep people inspired and thinking of a brighter future when today is so fucked. She's put in the asterisk, but I believe in just calling out that word and saying it for what it is. My second favorite word after fucked. So what's your idea? Why, as her point, and certainly on one level, so why should we start thinking about it? It's sort of not a dissimilar questions to Matt's.
Yeah, I think it's something that we definitely explored in the paralysis paradox, really. This idea that, imagining a future is difficult at the moment because of the kind of dissonance that's kind of, filtering through all of society. And ultimately, I think it's really the responsibility of businesses to kind of provide that positivity and that optimism, because governments aren't doing it. And it's too hard to do it as individuals because we are so bogged down. And I think it kind of links back to the 20-year cycle of innovation that we've been talking about here at the Future Laboratory. This idea that, yes, it is a terrible time. Like, it's not been worse in my memory. Not sure about.
Of course, I'm older than you, Adam, and for me, it's never been better, because each time I hear worse, it has got not worse but different.
Yeah.
And I think this is the problem when people really think about, in your time, and I agree with you. But over time, we see the patterns. Recessions, inflation, stagflation. Suddenly the world is pacified, and suddenly there are outbreaks of war. This is kind of what history teaches us, that uncertainty is the only certainty we have.
Yeah.
And our job is, I guess, to try to plan and mitigate and manage that uncertainty in a kind of a more, I think, equitable way.
And I think what's interesting as well is that all those negative things, like the cost of living crisis, people's mortgages rising, it's causing people to question the direction we're going in, and to maybe give more thought to the future and the trajectory we're on. So I'd argue that ultimately there's probably never been a better time to engage people around the future, because it's a space that people are thinking about. I know even my kind of 87-year-old grandma asks me, are we going in the right direction now?
Yeah.
It's something everyone's
It's interesting. I was thinking, how do you test a ship best? You test it in a storm. There's no point in testing a ship in calm water. I always find this fascinating when people talk about, it's like things are uncertain. It's the best time to find out what it is we're made of in terms of, our ability to think, to be agile, to be resilient, to make a business that's really going to work in not the short term, but in the long term. So again, I really feel that the moment is now. Crises are the great opportunities waiting to happen. And not only that, we're dealing with such turbulence and such uncertainty that people are waiting. I think that was the point about the paralysis paradox. People are waiting and expecting leadership at a time when everybody is showing them, we've had Rishi, we've had Tusk, we've had Boris, is that the answer to put a third or a fourth in place, or we need to think completely differently? And that's the point about our, I think, presentation today. If you have any other questions, so just please send us those questions. And if you have any other comments to make, please do so. You can join our community network if you wish, by contacting any of the team here at the Future Laboratory, and they will be able to help you. But thank you again for tuning in, and until our next webinar
next week,
which is next week, we say goodbye for now.
Goodbye.